Robbie Swale, welcome to the Star Coach Show.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
It is, I've just had so much fun getting to know you and exploring what we have in common, our similar passions. And that's really what makes me want to have people on the show. I mean, not just if they're like me. I want like to have lots of diversity and different perspectives on the show. But what I love about Robbie, and I want to tell you all about why we are getting the honor of learning more about Robbie today. He is also a leadership coach, an author, and a podcaster. So see right there, we're already starting to get some things in alignment. But what he and I share, I think, is honoring the craft of coaching, honoring what coaching brings to the world. Robbie is the founder of The Coach's Journey and the host of the Coach's Journey podcast. And what he does is interview coaches on their journey. So it should sound familiar to many of you in the audience, what they've done to develop successful coaching businesses and what that really means to them. Now, Robbie has created something called the Coaching Business Flywheel. And little teaser here, that's what we're going to be talking about. We are going to be letting you know what this coaching business flywheel is all about, sort of what tweaked in his brain to say, ooh, let's put this together, and what he's done with that. And I'm going to challenge all of you listening to be thinking about, how can I use these concepts to get my work into the world, to continue to bring my impact? Because that is really what's going to make the world a better place to be in. And as awesome as the world is, we can always use improvement. So with that, Robbie Swale, welcome to the show again.
Yeah, what a nice introduction. And you're right, like lots of shared passion, lots of shared interests. But like you say, there's some similarities between our podcasts, but they're also really different. And that's what I love about it. Like you get two people who are, like 1,000 miles or two apart, but also have lots of things in common, and then make some really interesting things. And it's been such a pleasure to get to know you in the same way. And like I said before, to get to this number of episodes is just kind of, as a creator, I know some version of what that takes. And so full of admiration for you for that, amongst many things.
Well, thank you. And I also wanted to say that the reason why we're here talking is that, I mean, what helped us connect was that we both had the honor of being put on the list of I can't remember if it was 10 or 15 coaching podcasts, most helpful or most whatever podcasts. I'm sorry. I was just have been doing some social media around 15 top Dallas coaches that I was honored to just be put on. So now I'm like, that list that you and I got put on, was that 10 or 15 or whatever?
Might even have been 20. I can't remember either.
I don't remember.
But it was so lovely. And looking down that list, there were some that I knew of, some that I'd even connected with, or people who had been on my show. And then there were some that I didn't know about. And it's an amazing thing that you can be in this industry for, for me, like 9 years since I started coaching.
And for me,
still,
15, 16. Yeah.
And still be able to discover this like new corners of the coaching world.
Which is what I also, it's all about relationships. It's all about connection. So Robbie was kind enough to reach out to me. I was super excited to spend time with him. And that's what's brought us here today. So with that, Robbie, we're going to be talking about the coaching flywheel, but maybe could we start with what even sort of created the thought, and what was the spark that got that moving?
Yeah. So I kind of somewhat accidentally, I think when I started coaching, I didn't imagine that a part of my business, somewhere, if we look at money terms, somewhere between, I don't know, 15 and 30% in a different year is about supporting coaches. And I never really planned that. But when I moved from part-time to full-time coaching, I wrote an article about the story of that. And that went kind of mini viral in the coaching world. It got thousands of views and hundreds of clicks and likes and that kind of thing. And you can still find it on the Coach's Journey. It's on the coachesjourney.com now. It used to be on other places. And it's called something like How I Became a Full-Time Coach in less than 2 years or something, clickbaity like that.
Yeah.
And that was my first go at like, what have I learned and what is going on in this somewhat opaque thing of how I take this thing that I think is amazing, coaching, and I want to do more of, and make it into a business that will work for me. And I think part of the reason that got that so many people liked that was because, and it was true then, which was kind of 2017 or 2018, and it's definitely still true now, that there's a lot of story about like how coaching works, that it's very much in people's interests to sell to us because it's based on their product. Do this one thing and you'll in 6 easy steps have a 6-figure business in 6 days. And I think many people are kind of a bit sick of that. And there was something grounded about what I'd written. And that so that was the kind of start of what became later the coach's journey, including the podcast. In fact, the podcast really started because in that article, I mentioned that when I was first starting out, I interviewed, when I say interviewed, really what I mean is met for coffee, a set of coaches who I knew somehow, one way or another, who had businesses. And I asked them a bunch of questions. And then as I was having conversations with other coaches, I kept telling stories that they'd told me and wishing I'd recorded those initial conversations that I had. And so that's where the podcast later came from. And so in amongst all this, after that article, I ended up doing more work with coaches. And so I was building up this picture of, coaching them purely. I mean, little bits of, okay, here's the thing that I did, but mostly from a pure coaching point of view. But as you do that, and coaches listening, you'll definitely recognize this. Most coaches will. If you end up doing work with a particular group of people who somehow share some characteristics, you start to see patterns, and you start to find models or techniques that are useful for people with those same challenges. So that's all going on. Then the podcast starts. And again, I'm collecting more data. The reason this is important is because the Coaching Business Flywheel is not something that I like. This is quite a hard thing for me because I get a lot of resistance. I kind of think that all ideas have to be kind of start from research. And because I'm not a researcher, that therefore means that none of my ideas are valid. And I have to deal with myself about that. Right. So the reason I'm telling this story
Good
really
awareness.
is yeah, it's taken me a long time and a lot of coaching to kind of get that awareness. So this is all my way of saying this is me gathering data, which is why when the start of the flywheel idea happens, that first spark, it gets really interesting for me because it's kind of suddenly I'm cross-referencing it back against all this data that I've received in different ways. So the spark of the flywheel was that I heard Jim Collins being interviewed. And Jim Collins, for people who don't know, is the author of a book called Good to Great. But he was actually at the time promoting a short book which takes a thing out of Good to Great, but you can just buy it separately, called Turning the Flywheel, is what he was promoting at the time. So he was talking about, amongst other things, like very interesting guy, incredibly clear
Very
thinking,
interesting guy.
huge amounts of data, and kind of there's lots in there, and I could well be excited to mine more of the work that he's done because I'm a relative novice to Jim Collins. To his work. But there's this idea of the flywheel was in there. And I'll explain it a little bit more in a sec if that's useful for people, because I know you use this idea with clients, and I have done too. So it's not just a coaching business idea. It's actually just an idea that's really useful. But essentially, that idea, which is at a really high level, how do we build a virtuous cycle for our business? So we get really clear on where we put energy into, and if we do it, the business will keep gathering momentum, some of it on its own once we put the energy in. That's the kind of high level thing. When I heard that, and because Collins is a very interesting, charismatic storyteller, I got super excited. Like, what is the flywheel for a coaching business? And then the short version is I thought I'd got it, and then I realized I was wrong. I found a flywheel, but it wasn't kind of everything. And then I've iterated that to get to the thing that people can find now if they want to Google Coaching Business Flywheel or something like that.
Oh, love that. So there's a couple things I just want to highlight that Robbie just said, that if you were at all daydreaming, I want to bring back to the fact that, first of all, it doesn't have to be perfect right out of the gate. Some of our best ideas are being courageous enough to put them down, to begin to experiment with them, and then to tweak them as we go along. And I would, throw back to you. My assumption is that until you wrote it down and began to experiment with it, you wouldn't have known what needed to be tweaked. It's part of the process of being vulnerable enough to put it out there and see what does work, what doesn't, get feedback, so that's a huge piece of that. And the other thing that I just want to highlight is the whole concept of a flywheel is once it gets rocking and rolling, it is sustainable, but you've got to push and get that momentum going at first. So you've got to be able to put the work in to be able to get the sustainable whoo, 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 that happens with the flywheel.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Sound effects and all.
Couldn't
So
agree
what are
more.
your
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
Yeah, one of my clients said he thinks that I need to get like a better image for the flywheel that looks more like a flywheel. And now that you've made sound effects, I'm like, we need a video with sound effects. So it's worth, yeah, you've caught a thing there that's really important, or a bunch of things. So probably not going to talk about it. Well, maybe we will as time goes on because it's in the conversation now. But yeah, I've done a lot of work for people who want to. My books are mostly about how do we beat procrastination? How do we what are the things we build? And so for me, it was a lot about getting over my desire to be perfect straight out of the blocks, right? So it's like, and so I've been practicing that with my blog, for example. I write it with a timer and then basically just proofread it once and post it. And that's been like a 6-7 year, what are we on now? Yeah, nearly 8 year practice of just putting a thing out there and learning from it as we go. And that's definitely true with the flywheel. And yeah, so the flywheel idea comes from engineering, or they use them in weaving. And the idea basically is you put a load of energy in to get this thing moving, and then it stores that energy for later use, and the momentum gathers. But yeah, that kind of woof, 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 energy is exactly right.
So good. So right there, the thing you just said about writing your blog is sort of the price of admission right there. I mean, that is worth right there. If you stop listening, which I don't want you to stop listening because we've got good stuff. But what Robbie said about for 8 years, he has set a timer, written his blog, checked it once, and put it out there. And so how many blog posts would you say you have?
I mean, I have to check. It's not been quite every week for it'd be like 7.5 years now. So it's not quite, what would that be? That'd be like 350, 400. It's a bit less than that because there's been holidays and that kind of thing. I only write when I'm working, really, but there'll be over 300 of those of blogs written that way. Maybe 350 now. And
See,
just
and
one week
so
at a time, right? But at first there was none.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
yeah.
And if you had waited for that first one to have no twinges about putting it out, no, oh, maybe there should be this instead of this. If you maybe you'd be at, one right now instead of
Right.
three,
So,
so I just
Meg, it's
want
worth
people
saying
to hear that.
yeah, because it's not just like this is really applicable to building a coaching business. Like you say, the effort of um, getting the business going, it requires something, right? It's probably worth saying that the flywheel, we'll get to it in a sec. Like on some level, it's a simple model, but it's not like 6 figures in 6 steps. I joke it's a bit more like, I mean, 5 figures in 5 years with 5 steps and a lot of hard work. It's more that kind of feel. I mean, it didn't take me 5 years to get to 5
No,
figures or that kind of thing,
yeah.
but it's more that feel. But the one of the crucial parts of this, if we think about, like you say, building the momentum, is the tortoise over the hare, right? So I love the tortoise and the hare as a fable. I think about it all the time. People who don't remember, the hare is much faster than tortoise in the race. Obviously, this is from Aesop in ancient Greece, but the tortoise wins because the hare runs really fast and then gets distracted and like has in Disney, he gets distracted by some girl hares playing tennis or something like that. I can't remember. Has a nap, but and in the end, the tortoise just plods on and wins the race. And if you can keep your coaching business going for long enough, this is like one of the crucial parts of it. And during that time, you are putting energy in with the kinds of things that are featured in the Coaching Business Flywheel, which aren't rocket science. People will mostly have heard of them before, then over time, in the end, you almost can't help but, if you've been doing those things even a tiny bit every week or month, you almost can't help but have a sustainable business at that point. That's my theory. Of course, I may be wrong about that as well, but I don't think I am.
Well, and the other thing is we're about to walk into this flywheel. You mentioned none of this is going to be new information. And the reality is we're not likely to come up with new leadership, like overall concepts or new ways to build business, or new brand new never heard before concepts. But everything, and those of you listening who are like, well, but that's not new, so I don't want to put it out there, or that's not, the reality is the way that Robbie has put these ideas together and the concepts that he's built around it might be exactly what some of you need to hear. Like all the pieces you might have heard, but in a different order or in a different way. And if I've heard for myself once, I've heard it 100 times. Meg, you say things in such a way that even though it isn't new information, it lands on me differently, or it lands on me in a way that, oh, I could do that. I can, or it just creates new clarity. And that's the way that Robbie has put together this flywheel with, yes, information you've probably heard before, but in a different construct, in a different way to think about it. That my sincere desire and belief is that it's going to land on some of you in, oh my gosh, that's exactly the way that I needed to hear that to make that happen. So where are we going to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we do, I just think what you've said is really important for a few reasons as we get into this model. So one is, it is really like a maxim I have for myself. I can't remember who I heard say it. It might have been Michael Neal or somebody like that. There is no new wisdom in the world. So like the best you can do is present old wisdom with like 5% your flavor. And that for me is like pressure off, right? Because in service, like help one person, and like if I get out of my ego, that is an amazing thing to have done in a day. So I love that. The reason it's important to not switch off because some of it isn't new is what you said right at the start. Like, what's the like one thing that I can do to use these concepts? Like, if you get one thing from this, like that's everything. Because as we just said, so there are many ways to use the flywheel. I think you could use it as a buying tool for like support for your coaching business, because it's like, which bit of this is it helping with, and is that the right way to do it? But like one way is, if we think about what we just said about, if you were going to put, just so I write my blog in 12 minutes, right? It's the books are the 12-minute method, right? If you were going to put 12 minutes into your developing your coaching business every week for the next 8 years, then what is the like most effective place to do that? And I think that's the kind of thing that the flywheel can show us. So what happened was, I actually pretty quickly, having asked that question of myself, like what's the flywheel for my business, pretty quickly realized that, and many people will be familiar with this book, but The Prosperous Coach by Rich Litvin and Steve Chandler actually does within it present a flywheel. And they almost call it that. I mean, they don't, but they almost do. They talk about, I think in the book, they talk about lead indicators. And certainly I was part of a small group program that Rich Litvin ran, and we were really focused on that in some ways, on what are the lead indicators, i.e. what are the things that come before you get money. Money comes after the sale, after you have a client. So measuring your success on that essentially puts it out of your control, because I mean, we've all had this in the last 5 years. You just never know. If a global pandemic comes along, it's completely out of your control, and some of your business may just disappear. But there are some things that are within our control, and that's the aim with the flywheel, is to hold onto those. So in the Prosperous Coach, they have a flywheel. I should say, if people want to look at this, it probably is, if you're not driving, if people want to get up a visual of the flywheel to see it, you can do that. Just search the Coaching Business Flywheel or go to thecoachesjourney.com or something. And I map out the Prosperous Coach flywheel in an ebook you can get there. If people are interested, it's free. Their framework is essentially connect, invite, create, propose. And we could double click on those if we want to. And then you work with clients. And if you work with clients in the right way, if you do enough of those things, you almost can't help but work with clients. And if you work with clients, you get more connections through referral if you're doing good enough work. And then you've got a kind of virtuous circle. Then I thought at that point, I got extra excited because I thought, this is cool. Okay, I already know it. I'm already doing it. This is fantastic. And then I looked at it, and this is the bit that I got wrong. I thought that it was not just that it was a flywheel. It was also that it was the only things that you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business. So that's a really important distinction. Like I got it, because it in a way it gets more interesting at that point, because so I was like, actually, and I think I got partly because I think it's true of connect. So that's the first thing in the Prosperous Coach framework. Like I was interested in a kind of, what do you call it, like a double equivalent. So not only if you do this enough of this thing, can you almost not help but have coaching business, but also if you don't do this thing, you can't have a coaching business. Like every coach who has a sustainable business everywhere has to be doing this thing. That in a way is the 5%. In some ways, the 5% contribution here is me trying to work out what that is.
Right.
And connect is true. So connect is basically still in my coaching business flywheel as it is in Litvin and Chandler's book, i.e., if you never connect with anyone, you can't have a sustainable coaching business. Right. I think I can't see a way that you could. Like, so there are many ways that people connect with people, but if you never connect with anyone, you can't have a sustainable coaching business. And if you connect with enough people, you essentially almost can't help but have a sustainable coaching business. So that bit was right, but
so it's and that's in yours too. So that's right. That's where your flywheel starts. That stays.
Right, that stays. Then what happened was I was teaching the Prosperous Coach Flywheel to a workshop of coaches, and I looked at one of them who was a long-term client of mine, and I thought, hang on a sec. So the next phase in the Prosperous Coach Flywheel is invite people into powerful coaching conversations. That's what a framework that I found incredibly useful. And then create a powerful coaching experience for them, and then make a proposal, which, is say to them, it costs X pounds to work with me for Y months.
Right.
And before this guy became my client, I had never invited him into anything. I had never coached him. And I had never said to him in the way that I thought of proposals, it costs X pounds to work with me for Y months. And so I had a slight sinking feeling in the workshop because I realized
in the middle of the workshop while you were training it.
And I was just like, luckily, so one of my hobbies when I was a young man and a teenager was acting in plays. And that got me really good at, when things go wrong, you have to forget it. Because if you let the thing you've slightly bodged your line, if you let that get in the way, the whole play goes down. You have to keep going, basically, rescue it, keep going. So that got me really good, very useful for coaching as well, at forget the thoughts, or like in this case, store it for later. So then I got interested, okay, can I actually create what I thought I'd seen that the Prosperous Coach Flywheel was? I.e., can I create a flywheel for the coaching business, which is also the only, I didn't know how many it would be, maybe 5. In the end, it felt like it was 5 things that you have to do to have a sustainable coaching business. And people will hear or see, if they dig into it, that the Prosperous Coach approach is contained within the coaching business flywheel.
But it's with your flair, with your experience.
Right. And it includes much more. So because there are there are plenty. So this client, for example, was a podcast client. So he'd come because he'd listened to the podcast loads, and he'd had loads of insight from that. And then as part of that, I described my group coaching program, which is called the Coach's Journey Community, and tell people how to sign up, or you can find that, or send it to a website or whatever. And then he'd become a client. And so I definitely hadn't done prosperous coach on him, but he definitely had become a client. And also there are plenty of people who use all kinds of tools
to
connect, but also to take people on that journey from, I've never heard of Meg before, to I really want to pay Meg, and maybe even I pay Meg. And there are many ways to do that. And it's really important to know that. I think people get a little too attached to one approach, and sometimes that can get in the way of things.
Oh, I love that.
That's quite a bit from me, Meg.
That's a great background to how you got to, and also the way that you tested things and taught things and engaged. So let's now do a dive. We know that your flywheel includes connect with people, because we know that if we don't connect, unless we're gonna like coach robots and we have somehow some kind of supply of robots that are going to come talk to us.
Even then, you'd have to connect with the robots, Meg.
That's true.
There's no way of doing it. That has to happen at some point. So yeah, let me run around the flywheel. And like I say, you can get a picture of this up by just googling the Coaching Business Flywheel or going to thecoachesjourney.com. But I'll describe it in case for people who are driving.
And we will also have links for Robbie's stuff in the show notes. So. Yeah. Okay.
So essentially, imagine a circle. It doesn't quite, as my client Alex said, it doesn't look enough like a flywheel for him, but it is in the image a circle. And at kind of 12 o'clock on the clock face is connect with people. So that's partly because it's at 12. Because for me, it does feel like the start of this. it does feel like where all these things happen. Although when
Right.
you look at a flywheel, it's a bit like most things in a complex world, no one really knows where it starts, right? Because as soon as you've worked with one client, some of these things start in all kinds of places around the wheel.
Right.
So, but if you connect with
Beautiful.
enough people, you almost can't help but have a coaching business. And that language almost can't help but, that's the language of the flywheel. So if you Google this enough, or you look in the ebook that we've got on the coachmachine.com, there's like an Amazon flywheel that you can look at, and you get a sense for how this works if you're Amazon. But there's lots of ways to think about that. And the language of almost can't help but is one that I find really useful, because in a way, a coaching business is so this is like butchering something that the philosopher Ken Wilber said. He said, you can't make yourself enlightened, but you can make yourself enlightenment prone. And that's what people who do huge amounts of meditation, for example, do. So we can't make ourselves have clients, but we can make ourselves a little more client prone. And that's the aim for this. Just like you can make yourself accident prone or less accident prone. So connect with people. If you connect with enough people, you almost can't help but offer opportunities for people to experience you more. So this is where this could be a prosperous coach style. I'm going to invite you into a powerful coaching conversation with me. It could be someone's been referred to you and you say, let's do our chemistry call, or whatever different people call it. It could be, I have a podcast. Why don't you listen to it? And that is whether I'm speaking to somebody or they just find me on the internet, right? So they're connected to me. And this is how my client who broke my prosperous coach framework, it becomes a client, right? By listening to the podcast. So, but if you never offer any opportunities for people to experience you more than that initial connection, I think it's impossible to have a coaching business, because how do they become a client, right? They
Right.
have to at some point have some other interaction with you.
Even if that's through really dynamic posts that you're putting
Yeah,
on social
exactly.
media, and you're
Through the emails
sharing
you exchange with somebody,
perspective with
it could
emails,
be
a
anything.
blog. It's imperative that they get some
Yeah.
opportunities of engaging with you.
And this, in a way, so this one, the next one. So the next one is help people create insight. So I think the crucial
Mhm,
thing about, this is a new thought, I think, offer
mhm,
opportunities to experience you more. Really, this is about, there has to be a route from that initial connection to you
mhm.
helping people create insight. And that really does come from us. So it could just be, like you say, like the connect with people is, I meet someone somewhere, and after that, I add them on LinkedIn. Connect is done. The insight happens later, could be in a number of ways, but there has to be a way for them to get to the insight. And that might mean me using my LinkedIn to share the blog that I've written, right? That would be a way of doing it. Or a
Right.
really active way would be, I met you, I had an amazing time connecting with you. I do this thing sometimes where I just sit down and think about who I'd love to coach. I thought of you. Here's why. Would you like a coaching conversation? So it can be as active as that, or as uh, kind of passive, but still active as, you're on my LinkedIn. I'm creating content, in 12 minutes every week. Maybe one day you read one of those, and then at that point, right, if I offer enough opportunities for people to experience me more, I almost can't help but, because of who we all are as coaches, help people to create insight. If,
Beautiful.
if you never help anyone to create insight, it's basically impossible to have a coaching business. Like, even if that comes during coaching, right? At some point it has to
Mhm.
happen. I put it here on the flywheel because I think it's really useful to know that a powerful way to put energy into a coaching business is to help people who aren't yet your clients create insight in some way.
I love that. So let's just read, just for those of
Yeah, yeah.
you who are following, because I know there's so much great information being given. Where we are so far, connect with people at
Right.
the sort of at the 12, maybe at about 3 is offer opportunities to experience you.
Exactly. And then somewhere at 5 or so is help people to create insight, right? So that gets us
Okay,
kind of
good.
halfway
So
around the flywheel.
everybody's tracking with us now.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And it is worth saying, again, it's just worth saying, this is like, first of all models are wrong. There's a British statistician once who said that, but some are useful. So like, think for how this is useful. There will be some ways it's not right. And secondly, you could spend like, and I regularly do, like full coaching sessions with people on any of these things, or the arrows between them that guide you around. So there's lots of depth in this if you want it, because if it does do what I think, which is contain the whole of all coaching businesses, like, just think about how different coaching businesses are. There's loads and loads of texture in all of this. So
Love
we
that.
get round. Maybe you've had somebody with whom you have connected, At some point, you've offered them an opportunity to experience you more. At some point, you've helped them create insight. And that is then like they're already. So the Coaching Business Flywheel also has an arrow that kind of runs across it. Because once you've helped people to create insight, there's a chance that they start connecting you to new people because they say, I love this podcast. Maybe you'll find it interesting. Or I read this blog that Meg wrote. It really resonated with me. You, my sister, might love it, whatever that is. So that's already happening at this stage. Another reason why helping people create insight who aren't yet your clients is a good tactic. How you do that, a million different ways.
Love it.
Okay. If you help people to create insight enough, you almost can't help but end up telling people how you work, how much it costs, and how to pay you. And crucially, if you never tell people how you work, how much it costs, and how to pay you, you can't have a sustainable coaching business because we have to be getting paid. I mean, and even if it's free, even if you're in a situation where sustainable doesn't mean financially sustainable, although for most of us it does, if you never tell people how you work, and that it doesn't cost anything, they can't agree to work with you.
Right.
Like those things have to be in place for there to be a client. You have to somehow do it. Now, I had been wedded to, it has to happen in a conversation where I do it in a certain way. And this client that I had, and of course, as soon as I saw it with him, I saw it with a bunch of other clients I'd had. It doesn't have to happen. What do we say? It doesn't have to happen in the way you think. So, the Coach's Journey community, not always, but sometimes people like him sign up just having read the website, listen to enough podcast episodes, had enough insight created, feel connected to me enough that they're willing to do that. Partly because you can step in and out, so it's a different thing.
Well, and I just would add to that, you had to have a system created. So whether that system is you talking with somebody about what you do, how to pay you, how much that is, that sort of way, but you had to have a system that people can click on a button and see what it costs to do this and decide to opt in. So regardless of, tell people how you work, what the cost is, and the logistics of that can come verbally, that can come through a landing page. I mean, there are many ways, but you had to know what that was, create the system for that, and make it available to people.
Yeah, it's probably worth also saying, because some people listening may coach for other organizations or coaching platforms. It's like this stuff doesn't always happen in exactly this order, right? This is like, but for example, if you coach for one of the big coaching platforms, first of all, someone has said this to someone without which it can't be working. You have said it's the platform, i.e. you've said, I'm willing to work like this if you pay me this much, and this is how to pay you. And there's a kind of another thing that happens in those associate relationships, which is you basically still have to go through this process if you want the next one to happen, because you can be on a coaching platform, but if and they all work in slightly different ways, I imagine, but if your profile on that platform doesn't give enough of an experience to the person of what it's like, you offer them, you get the connection from the platform, right? But then you have to let them experience you more by writing some kind of profile. They probably have to choose between a bunch of coaches. Maybe you have to help them create insight at that stage. If not, it doesn't really, in those situations, and I've had this experience, they're not really a client until you've done the first call, because they haven't actually had any insight created. You haven't actually enrolled them in working with you. And so in those associate relationships, this looks slightly different, but all these things I think are happening. That would be a good place. We'll have to kind of test that thinking as time goes on. But crucially, the last thing is, once all this has happened, right? If you never tell anyone how you work, how much it costs, and how to pay you, you basically can't have a coaching business. But if you do that enough, this is a crucial lesson I learned from working with Rich and one of my early coaches. Even if you just start from the place of, I'm going to do that way more than I usually would, you almost can't help but work with clients. Right? The number will not be one-to-one. It's really important to say that at this stage. In my business, it's like every time I've checked it, haven't checked it for a couple of years, the ratio is rough, somewhere between 1-3 and 1-4. Just to manage that expectation for people. That means 2 to 3 no's for every yes. And I'm in a bad streak at the moment. Like I could really do with a yes, right? Just the kind of like I've got enough time that when I'm in a good mood, because I'm talking to somebody like you, I know that like what has happened every time it's been a bit like this over the years is a period of lots of no's at some point is followed by usually a bunch of yeses. But it's like
Mm-hmm.
that is part of the game. If you never tell anyone though, if you hide from no, you can't get yeses. And
Oh,
if you
I love
say
that.
if you're willing to have people say no to you, you tell people this stuff enough, you almost can't help but work with clients. And crucially, if you work with enough clients, so tell people how you work and how much it costs is down at kind of number 7, 8 o'clock. Work with clients is around at 10, 11 o'clock. Crucially, if you work with enough clients, you almost can't help but be connected to new people because at some point that person is going to say, it's going to meet somebody else. And some of them, not all of them, I'm really interested in this stage. I'm thinking of doing getting my assistant to do some research with my old clients on this. Like, when do they refer people? Why? Why don't they? Can I incentivize it more? Because I'm really interested in that bit. It feels like the biggest, cloudiest bit for me of like, how do you make that process happen or enable it
Right.
more? But if you like it from that very first, I think it was in those first conversations I had with people as I started my coaching business that were the genesis for my podcast. It became apparent to me that you reach at some point, people who have sustainable businesses reach a critical mass. So this is when the flywheel's momentum goes, like critical mass, where they've worked with enough people that the feed of referrals is enough to keep the business going. Now, there's ways that if your business is growing, that is not quite as true. Like if you change the way you work,
Right.
you mess with that momentum somewhat. Um, but that puts us back to connect with people, which means that again, we're now in the virtuous circle. If you work with enough clients, again, this is like the great thing about a flywheel is you can, once you've seen these steps, you can choose where you pile your energy to be effective, right? If you find some way to work with a whole load of clients, and a kind of associate relationship is that kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
without you having to do as much of the other parts of the flywheel, then that will, to some extent, feed connections, which will put energy
Mm-hmm.
back into the other business. So I feel like my associate relationships over the years have fed what I call my private coaching business, which is where people come
Mm-hmm.
kind of directly to me,
Right.
some better than
Throughout
others.
the platform. Right.
Exactly. So
So good.
there we've got the kind of picture of the flywheel. The interesting thing for me starts to happen, where we can get proactive about all of those bits. I find that mostly new coaches offer opportunities for people to experience you more is often a place of high leverage because actually usually new coaches who are new have got a network from a previous life. They're just afraid to use it. So if you can just
Mm-hmm.
help them, and I say this remembering it being me, right? Help us kind of bridge that gap. Then the opportunities to experience humor is often high leverage. High resistance is often in that one, and talking about money and how it costs. So that's often where
Right.
the
Right.
kind of coaching happens. Because we get into an interesting place once we've got our model like this, Meg, which is that if even I might be right about this containing all coaching businesses, then actually we all know what to do. We just have to do these things. And the good thing when you know what to do and you're just not doing them is that like it's all about us. And that there's lots of space for rich kind of personal development work, which there absolutely is in this. Probably
Love that.
the last thing then to
Yeah.
say is the arrows are a really interesting part of this for me as well. So the lines between each one. So once you've done
Mm-hmm.
enough, so like we can focus a practice, for example, on I am going to have a practice of connecting with people. And we could design that in any number of ways. But we have to make sure, like I said before, that that carries around the flywheel. So and I get interested in like, what are the like small things we can do to just make it that little bit more likely that somebody travels around the flywheel? So mine, for example, was I had to get over my this is a bit more in pre-pandemic days when I did more in-person kind of connecting with people. I decided it was a really important move for me, essentially seeing the flywheel without seeing it, that I had to get over my resistance to being the person who adds the other person on LinkedIn. So it was like I had this huge resistance. I was like, it's embarrassing. Like, what if they say no? Like all these things that to me now look like fundamentally, truly ridiculous thoughts at the time carried huge
Felt
charge for
really,
me.
yeah. They felt
And
real.
they were like it
Mm-hmm.
felt like life was on the line to some extent, which is crazy to say, but absolutely true. And so that was my deal, right? Like then especially once the blog had started, then I know they're in my network. Sometimes the algorithm will do it. And if they want to contact me, they can. So that was the crucial thing for me. There has to be a way for them to contact me after it. Otherwise, it doesn't really count as connecting. It's not going to help. What's the way I can do that? One way is I can get over that resistance to LinkedIn. If we think about the referrals thing, the very least I can do is tell the people I work with that my business works by word of mouth. And it would be really lovely if they could sometimes connect me to people. I don't know, like that doesn't always work. And it's definitely an art more than a science as far as I know. But I know that it is, if I never do that, it is less likely that people will be front of mind. Yeah.
If your assumption is, oh, they know that they can refer to me. Now, we have to say it. We have to ask.
I mean,
We
Megan,
have to
no,
open up that.
it's so true. It never ceases to amaze me. People will email me or being, old former clients being like, do you know, Robbie, is it okay if I connect this like amazing leader who is like one of my favorite people with you about coaching? Is that all right? And I'm like, yes, it's the only way this works. Please
Right.
do, but
Please do that.
they don't know if I'm busy. They don't know if people don't know. And so it's those kinds of things. Looking for those like high leverage moves to open up the arrows is another really important part of thinking about the coaching business.
Oh, Robbie, you've done some great work here. I feel your passion for making it possible, right? For giving some kind of a flow and a system, and to me, the best models, the best frameworks allow that fluidity, allow the, you know, oh, okay, I'm over here, but really I realize that I'm weak over here, and or boy, I'm really knocking it out of the park here, but what's happening to kind of stop some of the arrows to other places? Um, and I just am so appreciative that you're willing to share the work that you've done so that the listeners here at the Star Coach Show and other places are able to say, "Oh, this was what I needed to be able to get this barrier out of the way, or to understand where maybe I had a a a patch of space that I could grow into." As we're wrapping up our time together today, anything that you left on the table that you really want to be sure that we explore?
No, I don't think so. Just to say that yeah, it's been like to get into this with you has been such a beautiful thing to do this afternoon. And like it does matter to me. When we think about it at the coach's journey, there's a team of us now working on that show. What we think about really is like the vision is that no everyone who has the potential to be an amazing coach gets to do amazing coaching, and crucially, no one quits because this business feels too hard. And part of that is because people quit sometimes, I think, because they get into it thinking it's going to be easy. So it's really important to say that, like, for me, the amount of personal growth necessary to feel like uh, I have kind of full agency over
Hmm.
that flywheel in this type of business was an enormous amount of personal growth, a lot of facing fears in those kinds of ways that we've touched on. But it is important. And yeah, like when you put ideas out into the world, we've talked about that a little bit earlier in the conversation. For me, it always comes with like, well, Brene Brown would call it the vulnerability hangover, right? You get the thing out there and it's like, oh, first of all, like, what if no one, like, what if this isn't useful? What if it is complete? What if actually I've somehow missed it and someone's already done this? Like, what if it's not useful? And I got two amazing pieces of feedback in the first few days or the few weeks of sharing this in different ways. And they both basically said the same thing. Like, imagine if we could get this into the hands of new coaches, how much angst, how much stress, how clear people could avoid, how much clearer they could be. And so that's what I really hope. And yeah, look, coaching matters to me. And so I hope that even for one person, there's been some insights, and they can take this and run with it. Because you get one more coach doing that, they create 10 more clients, and those clients' lives will change.
So good. That ripple effect is one of those things that is oh so powerful. Robbie, thank you for being my guest on the Star Coach Show, for bringing your wisdom forward. If you want to know more about Robbie and the work that he does, go to starcoachshow.com and grab those in the show notes. However, if you're watching this on YouTube, you could just grab them right below here. Each and every week on the Star Coach Show, we're going to bring some strategy, tool, or resource forward so that you can thrive as a coach, as a leader. You can learn different ways to engage and talk. And it's incredible people like Robbie that bring their expertise forward that really makes a difference in the world. So be sure to come back next week for more strategies, tools, and resources. And until then, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and I'll see you next week.